Hello there. It is Erick Erickson. Delighted to have you with me. You know who else I'm delighted with today? Those cicadas. I just find the story hysterical. The White House press charter flying from Dulles Airport in Washington, D.C. to Europe ahead of President Biden's trip there was delayed for hours due to mechanical issues caused by cicadas. Yep, the cicadas have wreaked havoc on aviation in the Washington, D.C. area. They're crawling into engines and clogging the engines. They're clogging into the wheel wells. The planes can't fly to Europe necessarily when they've got these bugs on board. They're causing all sorts of problems, but mechanical problems now. A flying cicada was blamed. I mentioned this yesterday briefly. I've got the story now in Cincinnati. A flying cicada was blamed for causing a car crash. The insect flew through an open window, striking the driver in the face Monday night. The motorist drove off the road and crashed into a utility pole and sustained minor injuries. The car was itself heavily damaged. Cicadas are swarming. And, the moral of the story is don't drive with your windows down. It's fuel inefficient anyway. Now the cicadas can come in. The cicadas are everywhere. You know, you got to do something. You got to eat the cicadas. It's all global warming. You know what else global warming the problem is? Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez is out there blaming global warming on the refugee crisis at the border.
This is also climate policy that is impacting the global South disproportionately, even though these farmers and these folks in Central and South America contributed to climate change the least in terms of their carbon emissions. Right. They are experiencing the ravages the most right now and first. And so U.S. climate policy has contributed to this. U.S. foreign policy, U.S. economic and trade policy has helped contribute to conditions that people are fleeing.
Climate change and all this is where we are. Climate change is to blame for everything. Can you imagine the commercials within the next year or so? Men, do you have ED? I bet it's climate change. Call now and we'll give you little blue pills, blue light the planet, and it'll cure your climate change ED. They'll blame everything on it. Are you fat? Do you want to lose weight? If only you will stop polluting, you'll lose weight. Stop eating beef. The beef that's making you fat is causing climate change. It's all climate change's fault. It's only a matter of time before they start doing these sorts of things. It's just the most bizarre indoctrination. And listen, there are more and more people are embracing the idea that the climate is changing. There is still a large debate on whether or not it's a natural phenomenon or whether or not mankind is involved, and if it is a natural phenomenon, how much are people contributing to it? The scientists would tell you this is settled science, but these are the same people who tell you that biology is no longer settled science and boys can become girls. So I'm not sure why we should believe them, but there's a growing consensus that yes, something's up with the weather. Now, my personal belief is we're headed towards the end times and bring it on. The world ends in fire this time, not a flood. But you know what? Those of us who we're in the book, we're going to be taken care of. So I'm not worried about it. And really, I don't mean to be flippant on that point. But it is stunning to me how politics these days is aligned with fear. And this is across the board, by the way. Republicans want you to vote for them because Democrats are going to destroy your way of life. Democrats want you to vote for them because the Republicans are going to destroy the planet. Both sides are trying to persuade you to vote for them based on fear of the other side, as opposed to here are these great things I myself am going to do. I mean, the only great thing they're going to do is stop the other side, which I kind of get when you're a homeschool parent and you realize the left wants your kid to be indoctrinated in a public school. I get your fear of the left. I get the existential crisis. I don't know that the left in this country has fully realized the Pandora's box they opened in 2000 when they continued to be dismissive of George W. Bush, who actually won based on the rules and started delegitimizing elections if they didn't go their way. And now suddenly the right's doing it, and the media's like, oh, I can't believe they would undermine democracy. In fact, I want to spend some time on this point. when we come back. Also, I want you to know that my friends at Citizens for Renewing America, Russ Vogt, he's been on the program. He was President Trump's OMB Director, Office of Management and Budget, has new group Citizens for Renewing America. They've got a toolkit for combating critical race theory in your community. If you want it, text the word data to 33777. Text data to 33777. I'll send you back a link on what critical theory is and their toolkit for fighting it in your local community. It's a really great presentation from them on what you can do to get involved and stop the spread of critical theory in your schools. Welcome back. It is Erick Erickson here. This most bizarre story is out there today. It's got all sorts of social media buzz. We should meditate upon it momentarily. In January, this is from Jeannie Gerson in the New Yorker. In January 2011, the House of Representatives undertook a recitation of the United States Constitution on the House floor. Lawmakers started with "We the People" and took turns reading the text aloud for the next hour and a half. Orchestrated by a new Republican majority to perform devotion to the Constitution, the exercise excluded some provisions, including ones that supported slavery. The Three-Fifths Clause, which says an enslaved person counted as three-fifths of a person for the purpose of apportioning congressional representatives and taxes, and the Fugitive Slave Clause, which commands that an enslaved person escaping into another state, regardless of its laws, shall be delivered back to the state owner. The 13th Amendment, which abolished slavery after the Civil War, was read aloud by John Lewis. But Representative James Clyburn, the top-ranking black congressman, refused to participate in the reading, calling the choice to omit provisions revisionist history. Representative Jesse Jackson Jr. similarly objected that the redacted constitutional reading gives little deference to the long history of improving the Constitution through the blood, sweat, and tears of millions of Americans. Now, you will note the reason that they didn't read those provisions is because those provisions had been deleted from the Constitution through amendment. It wasn't just those provisions that they didn't read. Anything that was altered by amendment was not read. The amendment itself was instead read. Notice she leaves that out. Well, now you got a problem here. Law schools are having a problem. A decade after they read this Constitution in Congress, during the nationwide grappling following the George Floyd murder, there's a Twitter discussion began among professors of constitutional law, a course I also teach at Harvard. They were debating whether much of the Supreme Court case of Dred Scott versus Sandford should be exercised from constitutional law courses. In the case, which Scott brought in federal court to assert his freedom from enslavement, the Supreme Court held in 1857 that Scott did not have the privilege to bring the suit because as a black person, he could not be a citizen within the meaning of the Constitution. Matthew Steitlin, a law professor at the University of Buffalo, launched the Twitter thread and advocated for editing the case down to a minimalistic page or so to omit text that is so gratuitously insulting and demeaning. He wondered whether assigning the material is asking students to relive the humiliation of Roger Taney's language as evidence of his doctrine of white supremacy. I don't have to read further than that. You get the gist of it. Law professors, progressive law professors, and law students do not want to have to read the Dred Scott decision because they think it is harmful. In the words of some, it is traumatic. Now, these are the people, by the way, follow along with me here. This is now a growing debate on law school campuses as to whether or not the Dred Scott decision, Dred Scott versus Sandford, 60 U.S. 393, issued in 1856 by the United States Supreme Court, whether or not it should be still read. You cannot really understand the growth of the slave abolition movement in the United States or the events in the run-up to the Civil War without reading the Dred Scott decision. You just can't. The United States, under the present Constitution, cannot acquire territory to be held as a colony, to be governed at its will and pleasure. But it may acquire territory which, at the time, has not a population that fits it to become a state, and may govern it as a territory until it has a population which, in the judgment of the Congress, entitles it to be admitted as a state of the Union. If the supporters of Puerto Rican statehood read that, they may suddenly like the Dred Scott decision. During the time it remains a territory, Congress may legislate over it within the scope of its constitutional powers in relation to citizens of the United States and may establish a territorial government, and the form of the local government must be regulated by the discretion of Congress, but the powers not exceeding those which Congress itself by the Constitution is authorized to exercise over citizens of the United States in respect to the rights of persons or rights of property. The territory thus acquired is acquired by the people of the United States for the common and equal benefit through their agent and trustee, the federal government. Congress can exercise no power over the rights of persons or property of a citizen in the territory, which is prohibited by the Constitution. The government and the citizen, whenever the territory is open to settlement, both enter it with their respective rights defined and limited by the Constitution. Congress have no right to prohibit the citizens of any particular state or states from taking up their home there while it permits citizens of other states to do so, nor has it a right to give privileges to one class of citizens when it refuses to another. The territory is acquired for their equal and common benefit, and if open to any, it must be open to all upon equal terms. The plaintiff himself acquired no title to freedom by being taken by his owner to Rock Island in Illinois and brought back to Missouri. The court has heretofore decided that the status or condition of a person of African descent depends on the laws of the state in which he resided. It has been settled by the decisions of the highest court in Missouri that, by the laws of that state, a slave does not become entitled to his freedom where the owner takes him to reside in a state where slavery is not permitted and afterwards brings him back to Missouri. It follows that it is apparent upon the record that the court below erred in its judgment on the plea and abatement, and also erred in giving judgment for the defendant, with the exception shows that the plaintiff was not a citizen of the United States. This is Dred Scott. This is the Dred Scott case. These are the facts. This is the history. This is what led to bloody Kansas. This is what led to increasing agitation among the states. Dred Scott, the Supreme Court stuck its nose into business left settled elsewhere, much like it did with Roe versus Wade. And it was the Supreme Court through Dred Scott that really helped rapidly get us to a civil war. It should be noted, I have a friend who's going to email me if I don't note this, so I will. You know, when the Civil War broke out, it wasn't about slavery. In fact, in the early days of the Civil War, that they weren't dealing with slavery. It was a matter of states' rights and a division among the states as to how to do that. Lincoln very shrewdly made it about slavery. Some historians would argue Lincoln made it about slavery because Britain was about to enter the side of the Confederacy and they couldn't if it was defined in the terms of slavery. It became inarguably about slavery and freedom of slaves over time. It didn't start out that way. But Dred Scott escalated and pushed the issue forward. And if you don't understand Dred Scott, if you don't understand the holding of Dred Scott, some of which, by the way, is still law held by the Supreme Court, some of which states law that the Supreme Court now still states but doesn't cite Dred Scott. It cites successor cases to Dred Scott about what happens with and the governance of American territories. It is the Civil War itself that overruled Dred Scott. And if you go to law school and you don't understand the history, if you don't understand the facts, if you don't understand the depth and implications of Dred Scott, you really don't understand it. And now we have this weird situation. There is a group of people in this country, the Wokes, Woko Haram, the terrorist group that wants to cancel us all if we don't agree with them, who have decided the United States of America is systemically racist. That racism is woven within the United States. It's like the Princess and the Pea. You know the Princess and the Pea story where dude is to marry hypersensitive girl. They put a pea under the mattresses and the pile of mattresses up high. This story, I mean, would you really want to marry someone that sensitive? They put a pea under a mattress and they pile up, 16 mattresses. She climbs the ladder, gets in bed. The next morning her back hurts because she can feel the pea underneath the bottom mattress. How crappy are your mattresses? But the P at the bottom disrupts all the other mattresses all the way through. That's the way they think of systemic racism, that it was woven into the fabric of this country. The moment the first slave got here in 1619. And it's woven through all of history. That P can still be felt and everything. It's kind of warm. And they think it affects everything. And yet they don't want to read history. That's the deep irony here. The people most likely to say the United States is systemically racist are the people most unwilling to fully reflect on all of American history. In fact, the New York Times, when it did the 1619 Project, specifically rewrote American history so they didn't have to reflect on actual American history. This is a real thing. This is a real thing going on. Now you've got the revisions we talked about yesterday of the Second Amendment, that suddenly the Second Amendment is now woven into this racism as it's all about slavery. Everything, these people are obsessed with race. They are obsessed with race. Everything is about race, and yet they can't even read Dred Scott. It's traumatic. They actually use the words traumatic. It's traumatic. Oh, me. My goodness gracious. I was about to say something, and I can't say it. I suggest a part of their body might be sore, and that would not be well. But you know what I'm talking about. These people are hypersensitive. They can't talk about this case. They don't want to read American history. They want you to believe that the United States is systemically racist, and yet they themselves don't even want to read the history. They want to create mythology. They want to revise history. And everything now is predictably about race. They are obsessed with her. These people are more obsessed with race than David Duke. You know, the alt-right, which are the white nationalists on the right, and the progressives are basically the same thing. They all hate Israel. They all hate the Jews, and they're all obsessed with race. It is amazing how politics goes it's one circle in this country. It's fascinating to watch this take place. And now it's come to this. Law professors in the United States of America and law students are upset about the teaching of one of the most famous cases in American history because it may be traumatic. You know, there are a lot of traumatic cases in American history. There's the Oliver Wendell Holmes case about sterilizing the insane, where they literally categorize people into high-grade and low-grade morons, a category that I think we don't use enough these days. There's Roe versus Wade, where a group of men exercise control over women's bodies and the bodies of the unborn, and no one really sees the irony when they say it's a bunch of men who want to control women's bodies. That was a bunch of men who did Roe versus Wade. They don't want to read history. They would rather make up history. It's way more convenient for them when they can make up history and then use the American media to enforce their retelling of American history, so you don't actually have to read it for yourselves. You don't need book burners in this country when you've got the entire media distracting you from the truth and you never even opened the book to begin with.
You can follow Erick around social media at